Hi, my name's Katie Martin, and this is my final prezi project. I would like to talk about my first 3 years. In my physical development and health, in my first 3 years was the most rapid growth. We can see the definitions and how the first 3 years you have growth which occurs top down, and we see that in page 144. Also, there's many reflexes when you're an infant until 3, and one of those is rooting reflex. The rooting reflex is simply just sucking. At 8 months, I was able to pick up food and eat it. And then about 11 months, I began walking. I believe, and so does the textbook, that taste begins in the womb. Infants like things that are familiar to them. I know for me, my mom ate a lot of popcorn jelly beans, and now I love popcorn jelly beans, and I liked them when I was very little as well. As a child, I was not around a lot of other kids, so maybe the reason I started walking so late was because I was not around a lot of kids. My cognitive development, I don't really remember my infancy, and I used some of my reflexes, and I was able to gain control over them, and we see that the book talks about this in page 185. I used illicit imitation, and I copied others and performed those things that I'd never done before until I saw them. I was able to categorize color, shapes, and animals. Next, I would like to talk about my psychosocial development for my first 3 years. I was an easy temperament child, which means I was generally happy. I played well with others, and I didn't mind playing with others. I didn't cry a lot, but I did, however, want attention. I was able to use altruistic behavior, which means that you comfort others when they look sad. One of the stages that you go through during the first 3 years is trust versus mistrust. This is trusting on the caregiver for basic needs to be met, and I did this with my mother. I also had a secure attachment, which means I was upset when my mom left sometimes, but I was happy to see her return, and we can see that on page 229 in the textbook. In addition, there is autonomy versus shame and doubt, and in this stage the infant's exploring and finding things that he or she likes. Like I was able to find out that I liked animals and other things like that. Our next stage after this one will be early childhood, but we see in these pictures that this is my first 3 years. This is my first year, my second year, and my third, and you can see the rapid development and the rapid growth. So on to early childhood, I would like to talk about physical development and health and cognitive development. My physical development, I shot up and I slimmed down. And that we see on page 257 that ages 3 through 6 are the most rapid brain growth occurs. I had no problems with inureus, which that is bedwetting, and I was able to run and jump and use my gross motor skills. I had good sleeping patterns, and I had luckily no food allergies. My cognitive development, I participated in pretend play and had many pretend friends. During this cognitive development, we develop egocentrism, and that's when a child centers so much of their point of view that they cannot see others. On page 290, it states that by age 6, our vocab is 2,600 words, and we can understand more than 20,000 words. Also, during my cognitive development in early childhood, I was able to understand numbers, like counting. I had generic memory, like riding the school bus every day, and episodic memory, which is different specific memories. Now I'd like to talk about psychosocial development in my early childhood years. There's a thing that is called self-concept, which is the total picture of our abilities and traits, and that's from textbook 302. Erickson's stage, initiative versus guilt, happens during early childhood, and that's when you're learning and understanding and feeling guilt and frustration. Oftentimes in this stage, you're feeling guilt for no real reason. I also played formal games with rules, which is softball. I played that from age 5 and 6, all the way till around age 13. And I did participate in associative play, where I played Barbies with others, but we did not have a goal in playing. And you can see right here in this picture, this is a picture of my early childhood, and we are doing a game. This is before a softball game, so that is a formal game with rules. Alright, next I would like to talk about my middle childhood. My physical development and health, dental care, I had my first cavity around this time period, and my bedtime was about 8, so I had good sleep patterns. I began participating in rough and tumble play, which is like wrestling and kicking and chasing. I continued in organized sports like softball, and I began to be concerned with my body image, and that's how one looks at themselves. And that's on page 345. My cognitive development, I used a lot of my working memory and that short-term storage of info. I learned empathy. In addition to working memory, it increases greatly in middle childhood and can affect academic success. I used rehearsal strategies for remembering things for school. And the concrete operation stage of Piaget's approach is during the middle childhood of problem solving and cause and effect, and that's on page 361. The psychosocial development for middle childhood, one of the stages is industry versus inferiority. And that's becoming more aware of yourself as an individual and managing most of your personal needs and grooming with minimum assistance. During middle childhood, you're able to recognize your talents and you watch a lot more TV than you used to. In the book it says 15% of people live in a blended family, and that's on page 405. And I am a part of the 15%. My peer group were kids that I went to school with, and also people that I played softball with. And this pictures me in my middle childhood years pitching a softball. So now we get to the interesting part, adolescence. So my physical development and health. During this time I felt like nothing bad would happen to me, so I took a lot of risk. And by age 14 I was the height that I am now. One very important physical change is the onset of puberty, and that's the process that leads to sexual maturity or fertility, and that's on page 424 in the textbook. Sometimes people say that adolescents make a lot of bad choices, but that's because their brain is still a work in progress. Their emotions, judgment, behavior, and self-control changes between puberty and young adulthood. Also, during this time I began to struggle with my body image. My cognitive development. On page 448, it states that people in the stage of formal operations can integrate what they have learned in the past with challenges of the present and make plans for the future. And I agree with this because during that time I was making plans for the future. During this time we often find faults in our parents and authority, which also leads to adolescence rebellion, which I'll talk about in psychosocial development. And my technology use affected my cognitive development and it affected school because I was on my phone at school. Also, during this adolescence, moral development comes into play in level 3 that focuses on what is right. My psychosocial development, I began I began to acknowledge my identity and wondering who I was. And identity is what goals, values, and beliefs that an individual is committed to. Identity versus identity confusion. Feelings of sense of self, and a valued role in society. In addition, something that happens in adolescence is adolescence rebellion, and usually that happens just with arguments with parents or authority figures, and usually it's something simple like day-to-day things like chores. And I definitely can attest to that. On page 494, it states that peer group is a source of affection, sympathy, understanding, and moral guidance. Adolescents definitely are influenced by their peers, and it helps them to become the person they will be. I got all this information from the textbook, which is The Child Development, A Child's World, Infancy Through Adolescence. And lastly, I'd like to show you a picture of my adolescence. Here is a picture from prom, and here is the day that I graduated. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.